Hi, I'm Rob Vanstone. Welcome to I don't even know how many editions we've done now of the Rumblings video podcast. I was counting once upon a time. I kind of lost count during the long hiatus. I am here with my worthy constituent, Dr. Murray McCormick, and we're going to discuss the Saskatchewan-roughriders. They're preparing for Saturday's game against the Hamilton Tiger Cats, 8 p.m. Mosaic Stadium. Plenty of good seats still available. The Roughriders are coming off a 33-29 loss to the BC Lions on Friday. Win.
Oh, boy. It
Realize,
feels like a loss. It feels like a loss still.
It's an interesting scenario where you almost feel like they have to recover from a victory.
That's what I keep thinking about this.
Freudian slip there.
I keep thinking about this one going, yeah, they won the game. And Cody Fajardo made the point yesterday. Everyone's acting, paraphrasing, is acting so sad that they almost like but they won the game. The bottom line is they won the game. And, if they lose that one, holy smokes, do we have a whole lot of fodder for the next week or so to talk before they heading into the Tiger Cats. Even if they win, we have so much fodder because of the strange quirkiness of that game to go up 31-0 and then sort of take their foot off the gas and let the Lions back in, or did the Lions claw their way back in?
I'm not sure they took their foot off the gas as much as they got out of the car and let it roll over a cliff.
Maybe they just.
But they didn't have the Thelma and Louise ending. They ended up being fine.
But it was still, it's such, and you and I, we still talk about how, what do we get from that game? Do we sort of build up on those first three offensive possessions when they just look like, holy smokes, I don't think I've ever seen them look that good. And, you talk about in a long time to look that efficient. And we talked a little bit about how we couldn't even take notes. There was such a fast-paced offense that things are happening and just watching and going, boy, is this going to be a rout? And then somehow Lucky Whitehead scores that touchdown over Nick Marshall, and it seemed to get the Lions back into the game. And there they are. We're here talking about a game from Friday, still scratching our heads and wondering what's going on, what happened.
I mean, it's the pace of the offense, and we talked about it on Friday night at the game. My routine is often, I write down every play, keep my own play-by-play. And if there's a play of note, or even if a play that there's anything marginal about it, I'll usually tweet something about the play. And it never really was a problem before. During the Stephen McAdoo years, it certainly wasn't anyway. But all of a sudden on Friday, by the time I'd written down, say, Fajardo to Moore, 7 yards, 2nd and 3, wherever the ball is, by the time I had written that down, they were pretty much ready to call the next play. I didn't have time to tweet anything about it. And and there were a couple of times I caught myself tweeting as the next play was starting, just because the pace of the offense was so much greater. And there's no way of comparing in terms of, I guess you go back to last year's or the telecast from 2 years ago and calculate how long they typically took between snaps. But just it was exhausting watching that game. I can't imagine what it was like to play it.
I think one of the things, looking back at that fast start, I think the Lions were flustered by Michael Riley's, not starting the game. I think people know that he was scheduled to be started. His elbow wasn't quite ready to go and decided better go with Nathan Rourke. The Canadian quarterback gets the start. But I really think the Lions were a little flustered by that, a little shaken up by their man not being in there and getting this guy who they're going to say they had their back. And, you and I have been around this league a long, long time. We haven't seen many Canadian quarterbacks start a game.
No.
Not in real life, and maybe back in black and white days and stuff. But
well, I'm actually doing a flashback on the last time the Riders played a Labor Day weekend game that didn't involve the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And it was September of 1981, and the Montreal Alouettes starting quarterback that day, even though Vince Ferragamo was on the roster, former NFLer, was Jerry DiTilio, a Canadian. In 1980, he'd been named. He had quite the great year for Montreal in '80, and that didn't deter them from signing Vince Ferragamo away from the LA Rams. So, but there are so few instances of that. Greg Vavra once won a start against the Rough Riders when he was with Calgary. So you see it from time to time. We remember Brandon Bridge, the successful version in 2018, the unsuccessful version
2018.
The successful version 2017, the unsuccessful version in 2018. There certainly hasn't been a lot of very, very many examples here. before Brandon Bridge, the last Canadian to start a quarterback for the Rough Riders was Eric Guthrie against the BC Lions on October 30th, 1977. So yeah, it's been a while. How did I get on that tangent? Let's talk about Saturday against the Hamilton Tiger Cats.
Well, I don't think they're going to.
Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
I don't think there'll be Canadians starting in that game.
No,
quarterback in that one.
Two teams that are really hard to figure. Hamilton, you look at the projections coming into the year, it was virtually a coronation that they were going to win the Grey Cup even before they snapped the ball in 2021. The Rough Riders, it looked like they were going to win the Grey Cup based upon the first half performance, and based upon the second half performance, you wanted to win the Vanier Cup. So
they look like they.
How do you know? Hamilton had a great start with one drive, albeit. Jeremiah Mazzoli is 5 for 5 out of the gate, throws a touchdown pass, and okay, that's the Hamilton team we were expecting, and then absolutely everything fell apart. The Rough Riders took a little longer for their offense to go into hibernation, but when they did, they were as somniferous as the Tiger Cats were throughout the Winnipeg game.
What I remember about that Hamilton game is how pouty Brandon Banks looked on the sideline. And I know there's a whole game, but every time they flashed to Brandon Banks on the sideline, he looked upset, frustrated, pouty, moody. Not like the guy who's coming off an MOP season, and have been tweeting lots of good stuff about
remember the 2014 Grey Cup and how irked he was in that game. So that you get that from Brandon Banks every now and then. Yeah. You also get a very dynamic player if he is in fact going to play on Saturday. He was limited in practice earlier this week.
It's kind of, just touch on that. It's kind of neat reading injury reports that are actually kind of true. I'm so used to, I used to call
as long as PC isn't sending them out.
Yeah, I used to call the CFL transactions the biggest pack of lies I've ever read in the week. And now I'm reading the injury reports and they're updated and stuff. And kudos to the CFL for finally joining the 20th century and providing updated stuff, because I think it's going to be good for people who are doing fantasy stuff. And we've kind of, fantasy people do what they like, but there's reasons for them to point out to. If they're going to be a fantasy football league with people doing it, they've got to have legitimate injury and gambling and legitimate.
That's the big one. I mean, CFL fantasy football has been around for a little bit, but that hasn't been enough to compel the league to do something about it. It was the introduction or the pending introduction of online or single game betting that finally made them realize that maybe they need to be upfront about these things. They wouldn't have done it out of the goodness of their heart. That would be asking.
Frank O'Shea would not be telling people injury news.
No.
I did a story a little bit on it a little earlier during training camp of how transparent Craig Dickinson always was. And one of Craig Dickinson's answers kind of made me chuckle. He says, it's hard to lie. Can't. It's easier to tell the truth than it is to keep saying what's going on. And Chris Jones, I imagine Chris Jones would be turning over, but not in his grave yet. But
there's some CFL head coaches over the years that if you asked them to confirm that they had their hamburger on a bun, they wouldn't do that. I mean, they're so intensely secretive and so maniacally paranoid that that's what you get. So this is certainly not in the constitution by nature of CFL head coaches, but there's larger issues at play here. Some of them, I mean, remember Ken Miller way back in the day? If you asked Ken Miller about a player's injury, he might pull out the X-ray. He was so honest about the injuries, and then from it certainly turned not long after that, not only here but everywhere.
But at least we're getting them now, and it's one of the. So, what are your thoughts on the Tiger Cats? Which rider team we're gonna get?
Hamilton's kind of a banged up team too, and they've had some issues along the offensive line, and I think those were pretty evident the way Jeremiah Mazzoli was running for his life in the opener against Winnipeg. So that certainly needs to be addressed. There were lots of questions about the Rough Riders offensive line coming into the season, but they didn't really, the worst fears certainly weren't confirmed in the opener against BC, whereas Hamilton just couldn't provide Jeremiah Mazzoli with any kind of protection, at least after the first series. So it might be feasting time for the Riders defensive line against Hamilton unless there's something they can do to shore it up. And you have to give credit to Jason Moss, who recognized that there were deficiencies on the Riders, or at least recognized not necessarily that there were deficiencies, but you're starting a left tackle in Brett Boyko, who was not expected to be the left tackle here this year. Logan Furland is playing his first game of professional football, and by the way, he's starting at left guard. Cameron Jefferson is playing right tackle. Again, not a lot of reasonable amount of football experience there, and a good player, but it was his first start as a Rough Rider. So, and that's a unit that just hadn't played together. And Craig Dickinson was talking the other day about how the offensive line should basically be 5 as 1. Yeah. Well, there was no real opportunity to have any cohesion, especially without any preseason games. So recognizing that, Jason Moss, I think, tailored the scheme toward the personnel and basically ensured that in most instances Cody Fajardo got rid of the football before BC had a chance to get to him. The average release time for a Cody Fajardo pass was in the neighborhood of, I think, 1.75 seconds. 25 of his 35 throws were released in under 2 seconds. So there just wasn't time. Now, why didn't Hamilton turn to that? We remember the Hamilton offenses of way back when Danny McManus, not the most mobile quarterback in CFL history, was among the most difficult to sack because they got rid of the ball so quickly. So where is that type of offense in Hamilton? Now, granted, the receiving core isn't what it's accustomed to being. Braylon Addison wasn't around, which hurt the Tiger Cats. It's tough to kind of throw those hot patterns when you don't have that telepathy with the receivers, and they've had to reconfigure things a little bit with the receiving core. It would sure have helped if they had a player like Luke Tasker in the lineup. Yeah. Luke Tasker. So they didn't have neither the personnel or maybe the inclination to paint over to the extent that they could the fact that they had issues along the offensive line, whereas the Rough Riders, I think, were much more proactive in that regard, and it contributed to the disparate outcomes.
I think the line's going to continue to improve. I don't think they're going to have a whole week of practice now, like a week of 4 days, whatever a CFL week is. And I think being together and being that 5 as 1 is going to become more cohesive. Now, I still think there's questions with Jefferson and Boyko. I really think those questions have to be answered. Boyko had tough times in the BC last year. He got benched. They gave up all those sacks. And, he was injured all the time. I don't quite know what was wrong with him, but he said he was battling injuries. But that was one of the reasons why when the Riders signed him, it raised a few eyebrows that they would go with this injured offensive lineman. So.
And now he's playing left tackle and protecting Cody Fajardo's blind side. That was supposed to be Taron Vaughn's job, and now he's gone for the season with a shoulder injury. So
just think about all the season-ending injuries, Rob? Like Achilles and five Achilles, 2 knees, and now a shoulder.
And a partridge in a pear tree.
Yeah, it's just.
And they had season-ending injuries before the season could even begin. I mean, going back to the Achilles epidemic earlier in the year, but. The Rough Riders have done a pretty good job, at least so far, of being able to weather that. Hamilton, despite the imperfections that were evident against Winnipeg last week, I still think they'll provide a very good test for the Rough Riders when you consider their personnel and their really well-coached team. And I don't know, I mean, it was a glorified preseason game in some regards in that nobody's really entirely sure what they have. Teams are still trying to get into shape. Craig Dickinson certainly acknowledged that conditioning was an issue in the season opener against BC. And so there's a lot of variables at play that wouldn't ordinarily be as important or as obvious.
When do you think we're going to get to the point where it's not a normal season, where we're not talking about conditioning, we're talking more about how the impact of playing football and just plays are? Do you think it's going to take another game to get to that point, or maybe even a little longer considering the layoff? Or will the season really start at late? Yeah, will the season start at Labor Day?
I mean, I think teams need to get a better handle on what they are and who they are, and that's going to take a little while. The training camp without any real anger directed toward the opposition for any form of opposition for a while is it's a long grind, but it's not that accurate a barometer, and so. Yeah, I mean, the thing I like about this week more is it feels like more like a normal week. Last week, there was the storyline surrounding the game. Yeah, they were playing BC, but there was so much talk about 628 days between football games and, perhaps wariness about throwing yourself into a crowd where people may or may not be vaccinated, et cetera, just the logistics of playing a game, et cetera. So that felt that almost had kind of a Grey Cup feel to it when there's this momentous game. Whereas now it's Hamilton's here on a Saturday night. Tickets are not selling nearly as briskly as far as I understand it. The Rough Riders are in their normal routine. It feels like another football game, and there's less hype. But I think that's a welcome development in that it does signal normalcy, that, or at least a return to normalcy, that all those little accompanying factors or ancillary issues aren't really part of the storyline. What we're talking about so far in this podcast has had to do strictly with football and mechanics of protecting a passer, as opposed to vaccination passports and all those things. So
I think we have to remember what the Riders traditionally have a tough time selling East Division teams when they come to Regina. It's traditionally there doesn't seem to be the buzz that when Calgary is going to be here and stuff. So Hamilton's always been a tough sell. Toronto's another tough sell because it'll be better this year with almost half of the team made up of former Rough Riders. That there would be maybe there'd be more easier to sell. But I also kind of think with ticket sales being a little slow, people had planned their lives. I think people had gone on vacations, planned vacations, and they weren't when the schedule came out and the season was here. And I know they missed the Riders. Maybe they weren't as willing to change their schedules to accommodate another football game. And
there's such a heavy concentration.
Yeah.
A football game on a Friday, 8 days later they play again, 7 days later they play again, bye week, then they're at home again, then they're on the road, then they're at home again. So it's you're front loaded so much of your schedule. That might not be the easiest thing for a lot of people to absorb financially or in terms of their timetables, because as you mentioned, August is ebbing away rather quickly here, and there's people who go to the lake, and Saturday is a prime opportunity to enjoy this limited but joyous summer that we have. So it's a little easier when you've got 2 weeks, sometimes 3 between home games. The East Division teams aren't necessarily a draw, but remember that when Edmonton was here in 2019 to play the Rough Riders, and the Riders had to win a game to finish first, they got a crowd that was lower than they would have gotten for an East Division game, with so much more at stake than would customarily be the case. So I don't know if you can ascribe it just automatically to the nature of the opponent, but when I looked at the attendance or the little blue dots in the stands on Ticketmaster a while back, there were a lot of them for the Hamilton game and a lot of them for the Ottawa game 1 week henceforth. So
I think
then Winnipeg's almost sold out.
Last Friday's game was the game you had to go to. I think that was must. There's many big events that come to Regina. Talk about the Rolling Stones, the Paul McCartney concert, the Heritage Hockey games. Those are things. Go well.
Jets won 2-1. Despite middle in overtime.
Yeah, that's true. But I think those are the events. If you're a sports fan, if you're Regina, or if even Saskatchewan people, you want to be part of. You want to be there to say, I was at that game. The first game, that test match when the Rams played at Mosaic Stadium, that was a big game in the fest. So I think that was more of what Friday's game was. It was more of an event than a football game, if that can be different. I think this is more of a football game than an event. And it's just showing the signs of, people I think get out of the habit a little bit, like they put their money in for season ticket sales and they go, well, maybe, it's just, I don't want to go. It's all on TV. And that's an old argument, but it is on TV and it's presented very well. So, do you want to go to a stadium and watch a game, or do you want to sit at home and drink your own beer and not spend $9 for a bottle of beer for a draft, which I've heard a number of my friends complain about was the price of beer. But, sometimes I think if you can afford to get drunk at a Rough Rider game, you have too much money.
Exactly.
That's way too $9 a beer. Holy smokes. That's a lot of money for a beer. I guess maybe we'll get back to the Tiger Cats game. What can we expect from Cody then? Are we going to see, because we always talk about quarterbacks. We can always talk about, but it's going to be on Cody. It's, his second season as a starter, his preparation, what we saw against the Lions. So what are we going to see on Cody?
I'm not sure there's a lot of fault that could be found with Cody Fajardo from that game. Yes, the interception that to TJ Lee, or by TJ Lee on the high pass intended for Shaq Evans. But if you look at the passes that Cody threw, of the 10 incompletions or 7 incompletions that there were, I mean, really, were there any glaring mistakes? He dropped the snap on that one play, and William Powell had to pounce on it. But I'm not sure that Cody is as much to blame as some of the play calling. You look at the philosophy in the second half, and it certainly wasn't tailored toward the circumstances of the football game. And it almost reminded me of the Atlanta Falcons in the Super Bowl against the New England Patriots when they had the comfortable lead and just kept playing as though they were trailing. They didn't chew up the clock. They didn't diversify the offense. They were so one-dimensional that I don't think after a while they were that difficult to defend. Obviously, BC was able to do some things at halftime to figure out what the Riders were doing because 19 first downs over the first 28 minutes, 2 first downs over the remaining 32. It didn't help that Shaq Evans dropped 2 passes. But I rewatched that game and I don't really see a lot that Cody Fajardo could be blamed for. I see some philosophical issues that certainly came to the fore more than anything that can be pinned on Cody Fajardo.
I like how he looked when he ran. He made a couple of runs. We forget that he's pretty mobile and he's lighter. He's kind of got that in mind. So I like how he ran. Just another. I thought Braden Lenius had a great game too. I know it cooled off in the second half, but such a cool thing. It's such a cool thing to see a guy like that score. And Mitch Picton, and you think about it, they started 6 Canadians on offense in that game. Without the Canadian quarterback across the field on the other side of the line from them and stuff. So.
But the GMs keep saying there aren't enough Canadians. Like, it's ridiculous. That game disproved the whole notion, or a lot of the notion, that there aren't enough Canadians to go around. Mitch Picton was his first 3 CFL receptions, one of which was a 23-yarder after he wriggled out of trouble on the sidelines there and got some extra yardage. Braden Lenius using his size to his advantage, pretty much just shielding Marcus Sales off from the football on that 12-yard touchdown pass. So even you go further than that, and you look at some of the contributions by Albert Awachi, who made a key block, as did Keenan LaFrance, on the William Powell 2-yard touchdown run. And Albert Awachi was part of the pass protection on the touchdown pass to Kyran Moore, who the Rough Riders somehow found a way not to aim the ball toward over the final 35 minutes of the game after he was targeted 8 times in the first 25. Again, those are the type of things that philosophically I think they have to look at. And why is William Powell, aside from these continually ineffectual swing passes, phased out of the offense in the second half, and why is Kyran Moore not being used? If you're not going to use him in offense, have him return punts. Get the ball into his hands. How does Kyran Moore, I mean, coming into the season, I think a lot of the expectation with Jason Moss was that he was going to use Kyran Moore especially. That Kyran Moore probably had the most to gain of anybody from being in the Jason Moss offense, because he would get him in space and do all sorts of things. And even though Kyran Moore caught 78 passes for 996 yards and 6 touchdowns in 2019, that there was more to be extracted from him if they schemed accordingly. And it sure looked like they had done that in the early stages of the game. But over the final 35 minutes, he doesn't touch the ball once. Have him return punts if he's not getting the ball on offense. Do something with him. They could sure use an explosive play on special teams.
They sure can. I think we're just about nearing the end.
I've got more rants. I want to rant about everything.
You can rant about everything.
I haven't got the dog in yet, Murr. I mean, we've got a long way to go.
Do you want to have a pause for the dog? So is the dog in there?
Here is Candy. Isn't she cute?
We can't see her. The blanket's in the way. Where is she? Oh, there she is.
Isn't she cute?
Yeah. You should try doing someday, Rob? Posting stuff on Facebook about the dog. You ever thought of that?
I love my beautiful dog.
I know. I kind of envious. My daughter was over with her dog the other day, and she's a 9-month-old puppy, and we had some fun. But I realized I don't want a dog. Too much work for me.
Oh, I love my dog.
I'll take my cool cats any day, or my 13-year-old cats.
and as we talk about the Tiger Cats coming up,
exactly. And lions.
I'm looking forward to this game. It'll be interesting to see how, if conditioning is an issue, and the forecast calls for mid-30s temperatures during the day on Saturday. Granted, it'll be cooler by 8 p.m., but that could be quite the taxing experience.
How you get them in condition. It's funny. Like Craig talks about getting them in condition and stuff, and they've been together now for 4 weeks. They think they would be in conditioning, but I watch them after practice. There's groups of guys running, they're running sideline to sideline and stuff, and they're all doing what they can. I don't know, how do you get in football shape other than playing football?
Exactly.
Which is going to take, as I've said a little bit, maybe that's going to take 2 or 3, maybe 4 games for the guys to get in shape playing football, and then we'll start seeing. But boy, I can imagine if they're playing during the afternoon on Saturday, what it'd be like for them to be playing in 30+ degrees and stuff. And so
I'd like to take a second to acknowledge and remember Ken Clark. The best rider punter I've ever seen over a prolonged period. Granted, it was only 4 years that he played here, and only 2 full seasons, actually, those being 81 and 82. But Ken Clark in 1982 averaged 47.3 yards a punt. That was a rider single-season record. He topped that by 1/10 of a yard in 1983, and of course had that field goal against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in Labor Day weekend '83, after he was called upon to be a place kicker after Dave Ridgway had been injured in the third quarter. And Ken Clark died on Sunday. He was 73 years old. Terrific guy, amazing punter, amazing athlete, a former Heck Crichton Award finalist with the St. Mary's Huskies. And so I know a lot of the Rider Nation especially people of our demographic, would remember Ken Clark. You interviewed him while you were representing the Moose Jaw Times-Herald after that September 4th, 1983 Labor Day game, and just a terrific gentleman, a funny guy, and someone who was beloved by his teammates everywhere he played. And he played professional football for 17 seasons. Started with the Portland Storm of the World Football League, played in the Canadian Football League for 15 seasons, and became the second Canadian to play in a Super Bowl when he punted for the Los Angeles Rams in 1980. And I'm sure you remember the first Canadian to play in a Super Bowl because he was a member of your beloved Pittsburgh Steelers.
Roy Girella.
Girella's Gorillas.
Yes.
So Ken Clark was a terrific guy, and I know a lot of people are really aching over what happened. And it was a nice touch, by the way, for the Saskatchewan-Roughriders to set aside, and thanks to Ariel Zur especially, for setting aside C22 in the press box and putting a little plaque on it in memory of Warren Woods, who we lost in January to COVID. And Woodsy, they've done a nice thing over at Evraz Place. There's now Woodsy's Corner at the Brandt Center. I look forward to seeing that because hockey season's almost here. And,
geez, yeah.
And
did it just end?
So I'd like to acknowledge, while we remember Ken Clark, I'd also like to take a second to commend the Rough Riders for what they've done to remember our great friend Warren Woods.
I still remember that Ken Clark game in that Labor Day game, and that was before you just blow people away with height. To be like the fact that his mother died would have been all over. It would have been the mainstream. I don't think we knew about it before the game was over when he told us about it in the scrum. And I remember him standing there. I'm thinking, man, this guy did all this and his mom had died. How hard, what a tough, strong, and how tough he was and stuff. And to say Warren Woods, the press box is kind of missing. We didn't hear that cackle, that distinctive laugh of Warren Woods. And I walk by the plaque every time and look at it and touch it. And I think about what great things. Warren Woods and I golfed quite a bit together over the summer, and I miss those opportunities and those good times. And he is missed. And TSN did a nice job of recognizing him too during the game, that show a local media guy, and Glenn Suter said some good things. They're all good. He was friends to everybody, everybody.
Yeah. I mean, we should all strive for that. How many people do you know who had absolutely no enemies? Well, I'm talking to one, but I am reminded of my detractors every day. So Warren Woods, just tremendous guy, and I'm glad that it's just so nice of Rough Riders to remember him. I just wanted to make sure that was emphasized, in addition to honoring the memory and contributions of Ken Clark.
Okay, I meant today to be the day I dragged up the email from Mark Melnichuk.
We always forget this. There's a little
then I look at my phone and go
in at the end. I gotta go get this thing. 1 second.
Oh, this is professional. Now we should have music. I
don't know why I don't have this ready. It's a little thing that Mark Melnichuk, our producer, insists that we include at the end of every podcast or face a firing squad, or whatever the consequences may be.
Well, the consequences, Matt, can't be stiff enough because we keep forgetting. So
I don't know why I keep forgetting this thing. And I'm scrolling through my emails hoping I can find it. No, that's not it. I'm sure we're just captivating the audience right now.
We're gonna have dueling email searches. How do we do that?
Basically, if you like this podcast, please feel free to give it a 5-star rating. It helps us grow the audience. You can find this podcast pretty much anywhere that you get podcasts. That being
and Stitcher too, wherever the heck that means.
Spotify, Apple Music, or something. This has been a really smooth ending, and I'm so proud of this moment in my career. I won't devour anyone's time with that any further.
It's like the Rider games.
The dog.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. So
It's like the Rider game. We started off strong and we're limping to a finish. How's that?
Exactly. So I'm going to get out of here. For Murray McCormick, I'm Rob Vanstone, And sorry again for this catastrophic ending. A microcosm of what we all saw on Friday night. Thanks so much for being with us, and we'll do this again next week, hopefully with more grace near the conclusion. Take care and stay safe.